Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Jobadiah Christensen. Uh, just to give you a little bit of my background, I have a master's degree in history, a bachelor's degree in history, and I minored in archaeology and in music. Uh, Today, I actually wanted to go through something a little different that's new to my channel, but I want to do a lot more of these in the future. I want to do a reaction video to this archaeological article. Based on my background, I'm very interested in archaeology and history. I've actually been on, I think, 5 different field work trips to the Middle East to do archaeology. And some of my friends and family who obviously know that that's my interest, often they send me articles and things that they're curious for my take. So this actually was sent to me a few weeks ago, or I guess this is 9 days ago up here by one of my friends, and he texts me articles sometimes, and I actually didn't respond. So I actually wanted to do a video response to this. I have not read this. This is the first time I'm seeing this. So I'm going to read through this and just give you my thoughts on what this is. So I'm not familiar with this website. It's called livescience.com. Looks like it's a fine website. I haven't checked out its credentials, so I don't know who this person is either. Laura Gagel wrote this article, so we'll read through this and then we'll do some reviews. So this is titled "Ancient Outlaw to Temple Discovered in Israel." Here's a picture. I have been to Israel. I have been to Jerusalem. I've been to lots of different places in Israel. So yeah, this is what it looks like. That's the picture. So just looking at this picture, let me give you my breakdown. So you can see my cursor. So we've got this circle here, which from an aerial view, this looks like a well. That's all I can give you from the size of this picture. It looks like a well. Other options for it, it could be a kiln. I've studied kilns. Kilns are used to, there's either pottery kilns or there's lime kilns. So it could be, but it probably is a well because see how it looks like it goes deep. So that look to me it looks like a well anyway, or some sort of a basin for water. Let's see here. We've got walls, walls of the structure. You can see an outline of the structure. You can see you can see these different layers. So um, it looks like just looking at the wall, the way it's built, it's got probably it looks like it's semi-smooth facing and not quite ashlar laid rocks. Ashlar is when it's perfectly cut stones laid on top of each other. It's called ashlar. This doesn't quite look ashlar. This looks like they just were pretty much grabbing whatever stones they had available, but they're partially shaped. They're not fully ashlar. They're not perfectly, square or rectangle, but they're somewhat shaped. They're not random rubble. Um, it looks like it's fairly well uh, construction on both sides of the wall, and then I can't tell exactly on the interior. Anyway, we've got some archaeological terms. We've got several trenches. These are and squares that this is where they excavated. You can see they excavated here, probably to see possibly when this wall was built. So they were probably trying to go down to bedrock, but it doesn't look like they actually went down to bedrock. So I'm not sure if they actually know the date of this wall, at least when this picture was taken. You can see they dug deeper over here. That definitely looks like they're getting a foundation material, which is a good principle. They didn't disturb the well, so they just left that as is. We'll see if they explore that in the article. I don't know what this circle is here. That could be some sort of a fire pit. It's odd. They wouldn't, archaeologists generally aren't going to dig in a circle like that if they're a professional. They're going to dig in squares like this to see the bulk lines. These are called bulks, the sides. Um, this looks like, I'm not even sure how much this was excavated. And they excavated over here too, probably to see the relationship between these walls and these walls, to see the dates, to see if this was built at the same time. So that's really all I can give you. I can't tell anything else from the context of this photograph. So it says taken at the end of the 2013 excavation season. So this is 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, was when they did this excavation. So let's take a look. Discovery of an Iron Age temple near Jerusalem has appended the idea that the ancient kingdom of Judah, located in what is now southern Israel, had just one temple. The first temple, also known as Solomon's Temple, a holy place of worship in Jerusalem, that stood from the 10th century BC until its destruction in 586 BC. So, just to break it down, if you're not familiar, Iron Age is pretty much, these are real rough because I'm not going to pull specific dates out, but Iron Age is going to be at least 1500 BC, all the way through what we think of as Roman Empire and everything. That's all Iron Age because they're using iron weapons. Prior to that is the Bronze Age. Prior to the Bronze Age is the Stone Age. All right. So this is focusing on events that take place in the Bible. That's what they're referring to. The first temple, known as Solomon's Temple. So in the scriptures, um, in the Kings and Chronicles, it describes the building of this temple, and there was supposed to be only be one temple. So right off the bat, in this article, they're saying they found a different temple near Jerusalem, which is where the first temple, the Solomon's temple was. And so they're saying right off the bat that this is going to contradict what the scriptures say is their point of view. So we already know that right off the bat. All right, a holy place of worship. So its destruction in 586 BC, which was by the Babylonians, I believe, in 586 BC. All right. All right. The newfound temple, whose roughly 150 congregants worshipped Yahweh but also used idols to communicate with the divine, was in use during the same period as the first temple. Okay. How do we know there's 150 congregants? Well, they didn't really have chairs at that time. I've seen these temples and other temples in the Middle East, and it's not like they had 150 chairs where you can just archaeologists can count them and they know that's how many people could fit. It's just going to be an open space, and they just have to estimate, okay, approximately how many people are going to fit into the size of this probably a hall. You can't really call it a room for 150 people. It's going to be a hall, or a sanctuary would be the more proper term for a temple space where you worship. All right, and it says it's during the same period as the first temple. So all right, we need more details before I can comment further. Its discovery shows that, despite what the Jewish Bible says, there were other contemporary temples besides the first temple in the kingdom. All right, I already have something in my mind for this, but let's keep reading. All right, if a group of people living so close to Jerusalem had their own temple, maybe the rule of the Jerusalem elite was not so strong and the kingdom was not so well established as described in the Bible. Study co-researcher Shua Kislevitz, a doctoral student of archaeology at Tel Aviv University in Israel and an archaeologist with the Israel Antiquities Authority, told Live Science. Okay, so this individual, this discovery of this temple means that they're shifting the rule of the class system of the elite. So obviously, let's just think about this. If there's one temple, right? So this is built during the reign of King Solomon, who's the son of King David, who um, is very revered in Jewish and Christian faiths. So you have King David and you have King Solomon. King Solomon builds this temple. So if it's just one temple built by King Solomon who rules in Jerusalem, everyone in Israel, when they come to worship, they have to come to Jerusalem to worship and offer sacrifices to atone for their sins. That's the way it works in old Judaic faith. Obviously, if you only have one temple, and it's in the same location as where the king is, then the opportunities of that temple, the way it's managed, the way it's run, are largely going to be ruled by what this person is saying is the elite in Jerusalem, basically the rich and whatever. The people with the power are controlling the religious activities if you only have one temple. But if you have multiple smaller temples, as indicated by the discovery of this small temple outside of Jerusalem, then the elite can't control the religious practices of everyone. They can't micromanage it on the scale as they could if they had simply one large temple. So that's all that's saying. All right, let's move on. Ooh, that looks fun. I do love Neolithic, but that's not what I'm going to go into right now. Archaeologists have known about the Iron Age site at Tel Motza, located less than 4 miles outside Jerusalem since the early 1990s. However, it wasn't until 2012 that researchers discovered the remains of a temple there, and it wasn't until just last year that they excavated it further ahead of a highway project. Okay, so this is pretty typical. There's old ruins, old buildings, old structures, old cities located all throughout the Middle East, and a lot of them aren't discovered until they're doing some sort of construction project. This is also very common in Europe. So they were trying to build a highway, and then they discovered these ruins. When that happens, typically what happens is the all construction stops. They call in a team of archaeologists, and they usually have a very short time period in which to do these excavations and documentation of the site. They try to document as much as they can because pretty much the highway project or whatever construction is going to go on is generally going to destroy whatever was there, unless what was found was deemed important enough to preserve, in which case they'll change the construction project or try to integrate the construction project with the archaeological ruins somehow, which is complicated anyway. Based on what they're saying this is, I'm guessing they would have tried to preserve it and probably rerouted the highway somewhere else. So, anyway, tel matzah, just to break down what a tel is. There are lots of tells. A tell is a word for, it happens all throughout the Middle East. What people did is they built a city. The city might have burned or whatever, and then new people would have come on. Over time, dirt would have accumulated in a city that was kind of in ruins, over a couple hundred years, and then new people would have come and built a new city right on top of the old city, and this process repeats itself until finally you have a mound. It's literally a hill, but you can tell it's not like a hill that was formed geologically, uh, because of its shape and, usually, anyway. So that's what a tell is. All right, I probably didn't describe it that well, but you can Google what a tell is if you want to know more. All right, let's move on. The temple was likely built around 900 BC and operated for a few hundred years until its demise in the early 6th century, according to Kislevitz and her co-researcher who wrote about it in the Biblical Archaeology Review magazine. Okay, Biblical Archaeology Review I have heard of, and it is reputable, so um, I'm comfortable with that fact. Likely built around 900 BC and operated for a few hundred years. So these dates, what does this tell us? Roughly, around 900 BC puts it roughly. I've heard that King David is probably around 950 or 980 BC, give or take. It's really hard to know. Um, and so this actually would place it around the time of his son, King Solomon, and then until its demise in the early 6th century. So they link its demise or maybe destruction. They didn't say destruction, but that's going to be at the same time period as that's going to be 586 BC when the Babylonians come and destroy Jerusalem and take a large percentage of the population into exile. So that starts the exile period. Okay, so but they're not giving me any hard facts. These are just statements. I need to see hard facts, all right, for why they think this. This timing of the temple's existence dumbfounded archaeologists. The Bible details the religious reforms of King Hezekiah and King Josiah, who assertedly consolidated worship practices to Solomon's temple in Jerusalem and eliminated all cultic activity beyond its boundaries. Kislevitz and Review co-author Oded Lipschitz, the director of the Sonia and Marco Nadler Institute of Archaeology at Tel Aviv, wrote in the magazine. Okay. So people are confused by this because if you've not read the scriptures, the whole story throughout much of the Old Testament is um, God keeps calling the people of Israel to turn away from foreign gods and idols and worship Him. And for a time, they often do only worship God, and then they stray and they start worshiping other idols. And especially this happens as they interact with outside cultures outside of themselves. So that's what this is saying. And then there were these kings after King Solomon, King Hezekiah, and King Josiah, who um, recognized this need to return to God, and they did. do that and eliminated, especially the Israelites liked to worship the Canaanite god Baal and Asherah. Those are the two main Canaanite gods from the Phoenicians who lived just north of them in what is modern day Lebanon. And they often would turn to those gods because those were the primary gods in the region. So it was very easy to turn to them. From what they've said so far, though, I can't tell that this temple, if this temple, they said at the beginning, I believe this temple is to Yahweh and not to Baal or Asherah. So we'll see. All right. These reforms likely happened between the late 8th and late 7th centuries. In other words, they occurred at the same time that the Tel Matzah temple was operating, the researchers said. Okay. Was it daring for such a temple to seemingly defy the king's orders and operate so close to Jerusalem? I'm not sure if I should read the whole thing out loud. The only other known temple is a small temple in the southern border fort of Arad, which served the local garrison. Okay. However, it appears that there were sanctioned temples in the kingdom whose continued existence was permitted despite Hezekiah's and Josiah's reforms. Here's how that may have happened. So I'm curious to see what they say. Before they say it, though, what I'm going to say, though, is traditionally, saw the temple in Jerusalem, the main temple, was there to offer sacrifices to atone for your sins. However, if you lived in the northern part of Israel up by Galilee, that's a long walk. That's going to take you several days to get down to Jerusalem. You can't go every day to atone for your sins. If you live in Jerusalem, you're probably going at least weekly to the temple. You might be going more frequently than that because there's a long list of regulations in Leviticus and Deuteronomy about um, the types of things you need to do to atone for your sins. And it sounds like if I were living in that time period, I would have to go to the temple every single day, pretty much, to offer a sacrifice to atone for my sins. So, first of all, if that's really how they were living and if they really were trying to follow the laws, they're going to have to go very frequently to Jerusalem to offer sacrifices. Outside of offering sacrifices, they're, the the priests that were in charge of that are from the tribe of Levi. The Levites did not have land that was specifically given to them. They were living in cities all over Judea, and I can only assume that they had some sort of religious function in those cities because they're not all serving in Jerusalem, but that's their primary function. So far, I'm not actually seeing anything that actually contradicts the scriptures at all. It actually helps to illuminate it and make sense. I'd have to pull up the actual passages to go through them and describe to see if there's any contradictions. It's just, if you think about it, it actually makes sense so far. This doesn't offend me as a believer at all. All right. However, it appears that there were sanctioned temples in the kingdom whose continued existence was permitted. All right, we read that. Here we've got some images. There's 6 of them, it looks like. Let's look at these real quick. All right, this says it's one of 2 human-shaped figurines. Okay. I can't really tell that it's a figurine, but it looks like some sort of carved piece that would have adorned some sort of a facade or column. This is another one. Its idols were likely used to communicate with the divine, so which they spelled divine wrong, but anyway. It's not clear to me that these are specifically idols, but that's what they interpret. The archaeologists who excavated this interpret these as idols. So, because they weren't supposed to have graven images in the temple, so obviously, if they have a graven image, they're interpreting that as an idol. Is probably their logic. This is a horse figurine unearthed at the site. Okay, I guess that's a horse. It's fine. The 2 horse figurines are the oldest known depictions of horses from the Iron Age in the Kingdom of Judah. So these are pretty significant finds, actually, that they found things like this. This looks like it was made out of clay. This is fired clay. It looks like this is not carved stone. This looks like it is shaped out of clay and then fired in a kiln, like pottery. So that's what this horse looks like. I can't tell of any other use for it. I don't see any holes or anything. It's not. Sometimes they often would have anthropomorphic common items. Common household items were often very anthropomorphic, just to like today we put superheroes on toothbrushes. Well, back then they just made animal shaped versions of. I mean, they didn't have toothbrushes, but they have like animal shaped, cosmetic makeup um, containers and things like that. So this is one of two human-shaped figurines. Okay, I'm not really seeing that from this. This also looks like it's made out of pottery and clay. You can see that, so that's interesting. This, they don't say what this is, but it looks like it's so this is actually a little more crude than I thought from the above, but this is, typical. This is typical construction from the Iron Age, I would say, from what I've seen. Bronze Age, Iron Age stuff looks like this often, and that's it. All right. Ancient granary. The site was home not just to the temple, but also to dozens of silos for grain storage and redistribution. In fact, the granary appears to have thrived as time went on, and it even had buildings that likely served administrative and religious purposes. Okay, excuse me. So what they excavated was more than just a temple. They found evidence of other structures at the site, and one of them was a granary. All right, I don't really know what to make of that right now. I have to process that, but that's fine. That actually makes a lot of sense. I don't know what facilities they had at the main temple, but one of the key offerings that had to be made was called a grain offering, where they would burn grain and wheat, and that was a grain offering, and that was one of the primary ways they atoned for their sin. And so to have a granary on site where you have a store of grain available makes sense, because oftentimes individuals are expected to bring the offering that they're bringing, but as time went on, as we saw in the Gospels, when they rebuilt the temple after exile, Jesus, right before his crucifixion, Jesus, when he went into Jerusalem and he cleared out the temple, because by that time they were making a practice of selling, the priests and other people were making a profit. They would say, okay, you have to go to the temple and offer this lamb, but the lamb, they were saying that the lambs that people were bringing were not perfect. They were unclean, and they weren't able to atone for the sin of the individual who was bringing it. And I can only imagine they would have had something similar in place for grain. So not everyone was a farmer. Not everyone can bring grain themselves. They probably just went, purchased the grain, and then the priest offered that as a sacrifice. So anyway, this is just my speculation. I haven't studied this in depth, so take this all with a grain of salt. But that's just my uh, analysis of what's happening here. It appears that Tel Matzah became such a successful granary that it catered to Jerusalem and became an economic powerhouse. It seems that the construction of the temple and the worship conducted in it were related to the granary's economic significance. Okay, so that makes sense. If they are actually worshiping the God of Israel, Yahweh, in the temple, that can back up what I just said. If they're worshiping idols, the reason why people worshipped the god Baal was he was the storm god. He was really the god of rain, because rain would provide the crops. And so, for an agricultural society, of course, you're going to worship Baal. All the Canaanites did outside. And so, if this was a pagan temple, that would also explain the granary's economic significance. So, either way, I'm not surprised by this find. Let's move on. So perhaps the temple was allowed to exist because it was tied to the granary and didn't seem to threaten the kingdom in any way. Okay, that's kind of weak. Kind of a weak argument there. I need to see more on that. Broken idols. The temple itself was rectangular with an open courtyard in front. This courtyard served as a focal point for the cultic activity, as the general population was not allowed into the temple itself. Well, they're obviously pulling from descriptions of what the Solomon's temple in Jerusalem acted as, because in that one, people were not allowed in the temple; only the priests were. Um, but to assume that that's how this temple functioned as well, I don't think you should jump to those conclusions. You need to see if there's evidence for that. So whatever. Kislevet's cultic finds in the courtyard include a stone-built altar on which animals were sacrificed and their remains discarded into a pit dug nearby. Okay, so probably one of those pits they found animal remains, I'm guessing. In addition, 4 clay figurines, I was right, 2 human-like and 2 horse-like had been broken and buried, likely as part of a cultic ritual. Okay, I've heard of that, but I've heard of that from a much earlier time period. Um, but that does sound. I'm trying to think of why they actually would do stuff like that. Um, mm, I'm not. I don't have any good analysis. I think sometimes they would do that if they didn't have, for instance, if you're in a cult and you didn't necessarily have a live horse to sacrifice, you might make one out of clay and then you'll smash it and bury it, saying to Baal, like, here's my sacrifice. Sometimes that's how these pagan religions operated, so that might have been why they did this. And similarly, instead of sacrificing an actual human, although they did sacrifice other humans, um, to Baal, especially babies. Maybe they were doing that with these clays. I don't know. That's just one way to think about it. Okay. But the ancient people probably weren't worshiping the clay idols. Rather, the idols were a medium through which the people could communicate with the god or gods, likely to ask for good rainfall, fertility, and harvest. Which those are they haven't pointed out which gods they were worshiping, but Canaanite religion in the region for good rainfall, fertility, and harvest. That's Baal and Asherah. So they haven't said that specifically, but that's probably what they're hinting towards, because that's what they were the gods of. It's not surprising that people in the ancient kingdom of Judah used idols, the archaeologists noted. Yep. Evidence of cultic activity throughout the kingdom of Judah exists both in the biblical texts and in the archaeological finds. Sure. Moreover, during this time, new political groups were emerging in the Levant. Yep. Given these changes, people tended to stick with their old religious practices. Even the Telmatz's temple architecture and its artifacts were reminiscent of religious traditions from the ancient Near East that had been practiced since the 3rd millennium BC. Okay? In all, the discovery of the temple sheds light on state formation. During this period, when the kingdom of Judah first emerged, it wasn't as strong and centralized as it was later on, but it built relationships with local nearby rulers, including one at Talmatza, the researchers said. And that's it. So I'll go through the comments because there are some comments. So they really don't give me any details. What I really like to see, because I've studied and dug in the Middle East. I've studied archaeology and I've actually practiced archaeology. I actually like to see, when I see an article like this, I really want to see details, right? They're making broad statements in this article. And when there's broad statements, broad generalizations, and no specific details to back it up, I don't really know what to make of it. I read it and I just kind of move on. Take it all with a grain of salt if they're not going to provide specific details. That's because this is an article written for Live Science, and it's going to be for a more wider public. I probably we could research this archaeologist. He probably has a publication. We could find that and look it up and see the specifics. From what they're saying here, it actually sounds like possibly what's happening here. It's possible that what's happening is that uh, you have the people of Israel worshiping Yahweh, and King Solomon is ruling over them, and they have a kingly line. But it's possible that because they didn't give me enough details, it's possible that Tel Matzah was simply a village of people that were not Israelites that lived nearby Jerusalem. because they're not giving me enough details to make any more analysis. So I can't even really tell. It seems like they're insinuating that it was Israelites that were still worshiping idols while they were worshiping Yahweh, which the Bible affirms. So this does not surprise me in any way. We have that in the scriptures. So this actually confirms the scriptures. This doesn't refute it at all. Um, as to why it lasted for 300 years and wasn't simply destroyed in the king by King Hezekiah and King Josiah, I don't know that, but sometimes it's hard to tell. There could have been it could have been a 50-year period where it wasn't used as a temple, and then after the reigns of King Hezekiah and King Josiah, people could have returned and resumed using it. And you can't necessarily see that 50-year gap or 100-year gap even in the archaeological record. Archaeological records don't, you can't always see that. It might be there, it might not be there. But the evidence for that either way, I don't know. I'd have to go dig up his archaeological reports, the archaeological reports of Kislevitz, who was doing this, this excavation. I'd have to dig them up to see more, to make any more analysis. So let's see what the comments are, just to see what the wider public or people who read this say. Nathan R says, is there a consensus as to how long after Hezekiah and Josiah's time were the accounts of their reforms written? Could the biblical accounts have been written later for political effect and not reflect the true nature of the religious situation in ancient Israel at the time? I can actually comment on that. There are a lot of biblical scholars that actually, and even non-biblical scholars, who agree on this fact that much of the Old Testament was written while they were in exile in Babylon. Um, so that's actually a good point by Nathan, for pointing that out. Um, I'm not going to comment more on that. You can leave a comment on my YouTube page if you want. But yes, that is true. Most of the Old Testament was written while they were in exile. So much of it was written not to be 100% true historical fact of this happened and this happened and this happened 100%, but more, this is how God revealed himself to us. Now that we're in exile, you know, let's, you know, this culminates in us in exile. And so they wrote down these stories and traditions, and all throughout the stories and traditions, you can see this is how God acted, and this is how we acted, and this is why we're in exile. And this also promises what he's going to do after we're in exile. This is, there's hope in that. And so that's the true purpose of it. So anyway, I don't find this temple alarming at all. I was going to give the Blue Cat 49 says, I was going to give the writer the benefit of the doubt on this terrible article. I realize that it is a short summary of what was likely a very long report. Why was Solomon's temple destroyed? Because the Jews were disobeying God. Any chance an outlaw temple might be part of that disobedience? Yep, that's true. That's a good point there, Blue Cat. Right along with what I've been saying. All right, number 2, the temple says that there was one God-authorized temple, not that there was only one temple. That's true too. It actually says several times people went and they built Asherah poles because that's how you worshipped the goddess Asherah. And they offered sacrifices to Baal. Well, if you're not offering sacrifices to Baal if you're not having some sort of a temple place. I mean, they sometimes rudimentarily would offer sacrifices to Baal without a formal structural temple, but it's so frequent in the scriptures that the people of Israel turned away from God and to these other gods that they most certainly had physical structures. So it's very interesting because I never actually thought about this. I always thought they just, went on top of a hill, gathered stones together to build a rudimentary altar and then offer their sacrifices. But it probably is more likely that they had a physical structure. So the article sounds like the writer farted a bunch of anti-Bible bias out of her. Well, um, I think the writer was trying to write it that way, but I actually don't take it that way at all. I think they failed if that was their point. So it sounds like if the writer was trying to do that, it sounds like they don't have a good understanding of the scriptures, and they should go and read them and study them more in depth. All right, roughly 150 congregants. Exactly. They don't have a clue. I commented this on the beginning. Yeah, this is all fine. The Bible is not exhaustive. What is written is limited in scope and was written to communicate something specific. Exactly. Heck, beyond this article, I probably couldn't find much evidence of the existence. Okay, that's kind of mean. You don't have to say that about this person. They were just trying to write something. This is their job, you know. Maybe they just didn't have much time. They just had to get it in before a deadline. I wouldn't go attacking this person necessarily. Why not just report the facts and leave out the guesses? Well, it's sometimes hard to understand archaeologists. She interviewed these archaeologists, got some statements from them. She probably didn't go and read, she most certainly didn't go and read the whole report, or there would have been more details. The whole report is probably going to be pretty dry. I've read archaeological reports, and even though I love archaeology, they're often dry and difficult to make your way through. And so that she just interviewed them. The archaeologist gave her broad statements, or she just extrapolated broad statements from what they were saying because maybe she had difficult time understanding what they were saying. I don't really know. So again, let's just not attack her. Anyway, Blue Cat Admin said, according to the Jewish Bible, there was just one temple in the ancient kingdom of Judah. Whoever a new discovery. Okay, well, no, there's one temple for Yahweh, but you didn't give me any details on whether this temple actually was sacrificing to Yahweh. So I'd have to go read the report. I'd have to read the report. Nathan, it doesn't matter when the accounts were written. Okay, so Blue Cat is responding to Nathan. Really tell a story. So this is stuff that I've already said about. All right, I don't need to read more from Blue Cat. Show more comments. Any other comments? Yeah, this is a good point. By Cars and Trucks, the Bible talks about Solomon building high places for the gods of his wives. That's why I keep saying I also thought they went up on hills to build altars because that's typically where you would worship Baal and Asherah. High places generally means you're on top of a hill or some sort of a high place. So I don't wish to insult the intelligence of anyone, but I've been a lifelong student. Okay, good. The flaw in your reasoning in the article is that from the beginning of the Israelites coming into the promised land, they did not do as God had instructed them to drive out all the Canaanite population. Exactly. So they, for 100 years, they fell out in and out of worshiping, like Baal and Ashtoreth. Ashtoreth is another word for Asherah. Ashtoreth is actually a city. That might be a typo. Ashtoreth, I believe, is a physical place. Asherah is the goddess, and Ashtoreth was a city that obviously was built in name of her honor. Moloch. So yeah, Moloch is actually the one that they would sacrifice children to. Um, all right. So anyway, these comments are nothing super new. So all right. So those are the comments. So this is the article. So just to sum it up, there was some sort of a temple discovered near Jerusalem from the same time period that Solomon's temple existed, and that's all we know. That's literally all we know from this article. They didn't give any details. I'd have to go dig out the archaeological report. I'm not going to do that now. If you have interest in that, I can try to search for it, and then I can do a reaction and work through that. Archaeological reports sometimes difficult to access. They often put them behind a paywall. You have to have a subscription to the academic site often to access them. So we'll see. I'm a little curious, but I'm not curious enough necessarily to go searching for it myself. Nothing here is super shocking. I think it's true that they found this temple, that this place exists. I think that the work that the archaeologists did is correct. I don't think they're saying anything that is false. Sometimes there's a hidden agenda when you do archaeology and you try to prove something to become more famous or whatever. But I don't think they're trying to do that. I think this is genuine good work. It's just hard to tell from the way this article is written. So, all right, thank you for watching. Leave any comments you have uh, on my YouTube. Please subscribe so you can hear more. I would like to do more of these. This was actually a lot of fun for me to do. I forgot how much I love to talk about archaeology, and I have not had an outlet for this since I've had a job change, and I'm not able to go on fieldwork sites, fieldwork digs anymore for the time being. But anyway, thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.